My name is Clara, I'm 44, and my husband of 14 years didn't just leave me for my younger sister, he sent me a text message to announce she was pregnant with his child. Before I tell you about how I legally and systematically dismantled the life he thought he'd stolen from me, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Thank you for being here, and I hope you're having a good day. Please, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's comforting to know I'm not just talking into the void. The text came in on a Tuesday, just as I was setting the table for dinner. The whole house in our quiet Pennsylvania suburb smelled of roasted chicken, the one Mark always said was his favorite. I was just calling our 12-year-old son, Leo, downstairs when my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. It was from Mark. She needs our support. I'm moving in with her. I stared at the words, my mind struggling to connect them. She? Who was she? A hot flash crawled up my neck, but my hands, for some reason, were steady. Then, a second message popped up, and the world tilted on its axis. Already emptied our joint account. Haha. That laugh. That tiny, digital haha. It was like a splash of gasoline on a fire I didn't even know was burning. I felt a strange ringing in my ears, drowning out the sound of Leo humming as he came down the stairs. I forced myself to breathe. Then came the final blow, the one that shattered everything. She's pregnant, Clara. We have to be there for her. And that's when I understood. She wasn't some stranger. She was my baby sister, Jessica. The one I practically raised after our mother passed. The one I'd loved and trusted my entire life. Leo came into the dining room, oblivious. Hey Mom, smells great. Where's Dad? My voice didn't waver. He's helping Aunt Jess with something, honey. Go wash up. As he walked away, I typed my response, my fingers moving with a cold, deliberate precision. One word. Congratulations. You're probably wondering how I could be so calm. How I could just stand there and not shatter into a million pieces. The truth is, my marriage didn't die on that Tuesday evening. It died 3 months earlier, in the pocket of a wrinkled suit jacket I was about to take to the dry cleaners. It was a flimsy piece of thermal paper, faded and crumpled. A receipt from a cheap motel out in the Poconos. A place we hadn't been to together in years. The charge was for a single weeknight. A night he told me he was working late, trying to get a big promotion and a salary increase. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a punch to the gut. It was quieter than that. It was the chilling certainty that the man I had built my life with was a stranger. That night, I didn't confront him. An argument would have given him the chance to lie, to gaslight me, to make me feel crazy. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I needed more than a fight. I needed a fortress. So I started building. The next morning, I made an appointment with the best divorce lawyer in Philadelphia, a woman who specialized in cases with hidden assets. I gathered every financial document we had. I learned that the small inheritance my grandmother left me, which I had used to start my artisan pottery business, was legally mine and mine alone. The business Mark always condescendingly called my little hobby was now bringing in more than his corporate job, and he had no idea. And the house? The beautiful home he was so proud of? I had bought it with my own money before we were ever married. His name was never on the deed. For 3 months, I worked in secret. I quietly rerouted my business income and personal savings into a new account under a new trust. I left just enough in our joint account to keep him from getting suspicious. I was playing a long game, waiting for him to make a mistake. I just never imagined the mistake would be this catastrophic, this cruel. For 3 months, I had been building a fortress. And with that single, arrogant haha, he had handed me the key to his own destruction. I stared at his name on the screen, the cruelty of it all settling not as sadness, but as ice in my veins. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply closed his message, my thumb moving with a purpose it hadn't had in months. I found the contact I had saved simply as contingency. He thought he was starting his new life. He didn't know I was about to end his. My finger pressed down on the screen to make the call. Chuk Chan Roy. Twahu, fin ben truak chua du chiu salva du dai. Twa siviet like kak van tutu denate, amorong kak chitit, dao sa veo kim sukva kak kuak do tho ida dam bao kachuin kong chi dapang yu kavi so tu, 25,602, mokantiron in song dong, kichtin ba chan tu kon, twan Thursday niam gat tatsia kakngwin tak dadare. The phone call with my lawyer, with my contingency, was short and brutally efficient. Catherine's voice was like gravel and steel, no room for sympathy, only for action. It was precisely what I needed. I slept soundly that night, a deep, dreamless sleep I hadn't known in months. The anxiety that had been a constant hum beneath the surface of my life was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. I wasn't a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a general on the eve of a battle I had already planned to win. The next morning, the sun streamed into the kitchen, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, just as it did every other day. The world hadn't ended. It had simply been brought into sharp, unforgiving focus. I moved with a deliberate, almost ceremonial calm. I measured out the pancake mix for Leo's breakfast, the familiar scent of vanilla and melting butter a stark contrast to the scorched earth campaign I was about to launch. I packed his lunch, placing the sandwich, apple, and chips into his lunchbox with methodical care, adding an extra chocolate chip cookie as a small, silent apology for the storm he didn't yet know was raging. He was my anchor, the one true north in my shattered world. He sat at the kitchen island, a swirl of blonde hair sticking up at the crown of his head, chattering about a video game. Dad said he'd help me get past the final boss this weekend, he said, his mouth full. Is he coming home today? The question was a physical blow, a tightening in my chest. This was the first test. I had to be a mother before I could be a warrior. I sat down across from him, my hands wrapped around a warm coffee mug, the ceramic a solid presence in my suddenly unsteady world. Honey, Dad had to go away for a little while, I said, my voice even and gentle. He's helping Aunt Jessica with some very complicated grown-up problems. It wasn't a lie. It was just a version of the truth so heavily edited it was almost fiction. He just shrugged, his 12-year-old mind already leaping to the next topic. Oh. Okay. Can I have more syrup? That was the blessing and the curse of his age. His world was still blessedly small. My job was to keep it that way for as long as possible. I watched him grab his backpack, shout a quick "Bye, Mom," and run out the door to catch the bus. The moment that door clicked shut, the performance was over. The calm, maternal mask dissolved. I stood alone in the sun-drenched kitchen, a stranger in my own life. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was an asset. It was territory. And it was time to fortify the walls. My first call was back to Catherine. Her voice was already all business. It's time, I said, no preamble. File it. Are you sure, Clara? She asked, the question a necessary formality. Once we do this, there's no going back. I've been sure for 3 months, Catherine, I replied. File the divorce papers. Grounds of adultery. And I want you to execute the injunction to freeze everything. Every shared account, every joint credit card. I want him cut off. Completely. My second call was to a 24-hour locksmith. I need an emergency lock change and rekeying for my entire house, I said. He arrived less than an hour later, a quiet man with calloused hands and kind, tired eyes that suggested he'd seen the scene play out 1,000 times before. He didn't ask a single question. I stood in the foyer, a silent sentinel, as he worked. I watched him expertly drill out the old cylinder on the front door, the very one Mark had so proudly installed after a supposed break-in scare years ago. He pulled out the brass mechanism, the collection of pins and tumblers that held the memory of Mark's key. It looked so small, so insignificant, for something that had held so much power. The locksmith tossed it into a metal toolbox with a sharp, final clatter. It was the sound of an ending. He fitted the new lock set, a heavy, formidable piece of brushed nickel. He handed me 2 new keys. They felt heavy and foreign in my palm, their edges sharp and unfamiliar. The keys to my new life. All set, ma'am. I thanked him, closed the solid oak door, and turned the new deadbolt. The bolt shot home with a deep, resonant thud. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The fortress was secure. The trap was set. I didn't have to wait long for the first tremors. I escaped to my pottery studio in the converted garage, the one place that was truly and unequivocally mine. The rhythmic hum of the wheel, the cool slip of wet clay between my fingers, this was my therapy. Mark had always called it my mud pie hobby, a condescending little phrase designed to keep me small. He had no clue that this hobby, this little side project, had become a 6-figure business that was about to finance the legal battle that would strip him of everything he thought was his. My phone buzzed around 3 o'clock that afternoon, vibrating against the dusty workbench. It was Jessica. My own sister. My stomach churned with a toxic mix of grief and rage. I let it ring, each shrill tone a fresh wave of betrayal. Finally, I wiped the clay from my hands, took a stealing breath, and answered. Hello, Jessica. Clara. Oh my God, hi. Her voice was a high-pitched, saccharine chirp. The fake cheerfulness was a weapon she'd used since we were children, a way to gloss over any wrongdoing. Listen, I know this is all so crazy, just a whirlwind. But Mark told me you guys talked and, well, that you understand. I remained silent. Silence was a vacuum, and I knew she would rush to fill it with her own nonsense. She faltered for a second, the cheerfulness wavering. He said you told him to take care of me. And I just wanted to say, that was so big of you, Clara. It really was. It just means we can finally move forward, you know? As a proper family. The word family landed like a punch. She had taken my husband, my future, and was now trying to steal the very definition of the word. What do you want, Jessica? I asked, my voice as cold and hard as fired stoneware. Oh. Well, Mark and I were just making plans, and my little apartment is just so tiny, you know? And with the baby coming, it's just not practical. So we were thinking, since you're being so great about this, that we'd pack up my stuff this weekend and he could just, well, he could move me into the house with him. It'll be so much easier for everyone that way. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it almost made me laugh. It was a hysterical, unhinged sound that caught in my throat. They weren't just content to burn my life down, they wanted to move into the wreckage and toast marshmallows over the embers. I'm afraid that's not going to be possible, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. There was a beat of confused silence. What do you mean? It's Mark's house too. He said. I don't care what he said, I interrupted, the words sharp and precise. Mark is wrong. This is not his house. It never was. And Mark doesn't live here anymore. I heard a sharp, whistling intake of breath. Then a muffled sound, the rustle of fabric as she covered the phone. Her panicked whisper was still audible, a high, frantic squeak. Mark? What does she mean you don't live there? Mark, she sounds serious. That was all I needed. I ended the call. The first crack in their delusional little kingdom had appeared. An hour later, the aftershocks began. My phone lit up with a text from Mark. What the hell did you say to Jessica? She's freaking out. I watched the message bubble, and I felt nothing. A few minutes passed. Seriously, Clara. Call me. I just came by the house. You changed the locks? Are you insane? You can't do that. Oh, but I could. And I had. I need my stuff. My tit-laced clubs, my Armani suits, my laptop. You're being childish and vindictive. My stuff. Never our stuff. The transactional nature of his soul was laid bare. I finally texted him back, the words cold and clinical. Your personal effects have been packed into boxes. They are in the garage. My lawyer will be in contact to arrange a time for you to retrieve them in the presence of a neutral third party. The reply was instantaneous, a string of typos born of fury. Lawyer? Are you kidding me? You can't be serious, Clara. Then the phone started ringing, his name flashing on the screen like a warning light. I let it go to voicemail. A new text popped up immediately. You froze the accounts. The accounts, Clara. The bank just declined my card. How could you? Jessica, and I need that money for the baby. You need that money, I thought, a bitter smile touching my lips. My money. He called again. I silenced my phone, watching his name flash, again and again. He was a rat in a maze of his own design, and he was just starting to realize all the exits were sealed. His last text before I blocked his number was a simple, desperate question. Who changed the locks? I typed back my reply, the owner did. Then, I put my phone on silent, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a profound sense of peace. Pause for 2 seconds. If you're still listening, please do me a favor and like this video, then comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know you've given me a thumbs up, and it tells me you're on this journey with me. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you know. Just type the number 1, and then let me tell you what happened next. The next day passed in a haze of surreal quiet. The silence from Mark was more unnerving than his frantic texts had been. I knew a man like him wouldn't just surrender. He wasn't scrambling for a solution, he was looking for a new weapon. I should have known he would aim for the one thing I couldn't protect with legal documents and financial firewalls. He aimed for our son. I was picking Leo up from soccer practice, the air crisp with the smell of cut grass. He was usually a whirlwind of energy after a game, win or lose, recounting every play in breathless detail. But that afternoon, he was unnervingly quiet. He climbed into the passenger seat, buckled his seatbelt without a word, and just stared out the window, his shoulders slumped. Tough practice? I asked gently, pulling out of the crowded school parking lot. He didn't look at me. I talked to Dad today, he said, his voice so small it was almost lost in the hum of the engine. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, seeped into my bones. Oh. When was that, honey? He called me after school. On my cell. He finally turned to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes sent a tremor of pure rage through me. It was a deep, painful confusion that no 12-year-old should ever have to feel. He said you kicked him out just because he made a little mistake. He told me that you won't forgive him and that you're trying to stop me from seeing him. That you want to end our family. He took a shaky, hitching breath. He was crying, Mom. He sounded really sad. Is it true? Why are you kicking Dad out? The sheer, calculated cruelty of it left me breathless. How dare he? How dare he take the wreckage of the life he had detonated and dump it onto the small, strong shoulders of our child? He had used our son as a human shield, a pawn in a desperate, last-ditch attempt to manipulate me. For one white-hot second, I wanted to unleash the whole ugly truth. I wanted to scream about his father and his aunt, about the pregnancy, the lies, the theft. I wanted to burn Mark's image in Leo's mind until nothing was left but ashes. But then I looked at my son's face, at the way his lower lip trembled, at the desperate hope for a simple answer in his eyes, and I knew I couldn't. My war was with my husband. It was not with my son's father. I would not let Mark's poison corrupt Leo's heart. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, into a quiet spot by the duck pond where we used to walk when he was little. I turned off the engine, plunging the car into silence. Then I turned to him, really looked at him. "Leo," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "Look at me. Is there anything in this entire world that I love more than you?" He shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through the dirt on his cheek. "No." "And have I ever lied to you about something truly important?" "No," he whispered, his eyes fixed on mine. "Okay. Then I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to trust me. Sometimes, grown-ups make very big, very complicated mistakes. They make choices that hurt a lot of people. Dad made one of those choices. A very big one. And it means that for now, he can't live in our house anymore. This has absolutely nothing to do with you. It is not your fault. It is not my fault. It is a consequence of his choices." He was trying to understand, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But," he said, "he was sorry. He said he just wants to come home." "I am sure he is very sorry now," I said, choosing my words with surgical precision. "He is sorry for the consequences. But being sorry doesn't always fix what has been broken. What I can promise you, Leo, right here, right now, is this: I will never, ever try to keep you from your father. Ever. You can see him and talk to him whenever you want. Things will be different, and we will have to figure out a new schedule. We might need a lawyer to help us with the custody agreement to make sure it's fair for everyone, especially you. But you will always have a dad who loves you, and you will always have a mom who loves you more than life itself. Nothing he did can ever change that. Do you understand? I was fighting for more than just my house or my money now. I was fighting for my son's right to a childhood free from this toxic burden, for his right to love his father without being used by him." He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders seeming to ease just a little. "Okay, Mom." He leaned across the console and wrapped his arms around my neck, a fierce, tight hug that said everything he couldn't articulate. "I trust you." In that moment, I felt a surge of strength that had nothing to do with anger or revenge. It was the primal, unyielding strength of a mother protecting her child. In his most desperate, cruelest gambit, Mark had only managed to push our son closer to me. He had tried to break the most sacred bond in my life, and he had failed. And that was a loss from which he would never recover. After his spectacular failure to turn our son against me, Mark's direct attack ceased. The silence that followed was unnerving. I knew a man like him, cornered and humiliated, wouldn't just give up. He was regrouping, looking for another vulnerability, another way to inflict pain. If he couldn't wound me as a mother, he would try to ruin me as a creator. He decided to go after my business. It started on a Monday morning, a day that usually filled me with a sense of purpose. I sat down at my desk in my home studio, a mug of hot coffee in my hands, ready to review the weekend's sales. My pottery business, Clay and Hearth, was more than my livelihood, it was my soul made tangible. It was the quiet hours before dawn, my hands covered in cool, wet clay. It was the alchemy of turning earth and water into something beautiful and lasting. It was the one part of my life that Mark had never been able to touch, only to belittle. But when I logged onto my Etsy dashboard, a cold dread washed over me. My shop, which had proudly maintained a perfect 5-star rating for over 3 years, was now a dismal 3.5. Overnight, a coordinated barrage of 1-star reviews had appeared, a dozen of them, all posted within the same 2-hour window. The comments were not just negative, they were personal, cruel, and filled with specific lies. One, from a brand new account named PotteryPro22, read, "Product is a joke. The glaze is thin and streaky, looks like it was painted on by a child. The bottom was so rough it scratched my antique dining table. Owner is clearly an amateur passing off trash as art." Another, from Buyer Beware 01, said, "Arrived completely shattered due to laughably poor packaging. When I contacted the seller for a refund, she was rude and dismissive. This woman is a fraud and a thief. Avoid at all costs." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew my work. I spent a fortune on professional-grade packaging. I sanded the bottom of every single piece until it was as smooth as a river stone. And I had no record of any customer complaint emails. This was a calculated, vicious assault. This was Mark's handiwork, aided, no doubt, by Jessica's nimble, tech-savvy fingers. It was so petty, so pathetic, yet so potentially devastating. A small business lives and dies by its reputation. Just as I was taking screenshots, my email pinged. The subject line made my blood run cold, urgent, regarding our account. It was from David, the owner of the small family-run company in North Carolina that supplied my unique speckled stoneware clay. He was more than a supplier, he was a partner. Mark knew that. Dear Clara, hope you're well. This is a bit awkward, but we received an anonymous email this morning. The sender claimed to be a former employee of yours and alleged that Clay and Hearth is facing severe financial distress and is on the brink of bankruptcy. They warned us that you have several outstanding debts and are likely to default on future invoices. Obviously, we value our relationship, but we can't ship your next major pallet order on credit until we have some assurances. We may need to move to a payment-on-order basis. I felt a wave of nausea, acrid and hot in my throat. This was a pincer movement. A public attack on my reputation and a private attack on my supply chain. Mark was trying to cripple me from the inside out. He was trying to prove what he'd always said, that I was just a housewife playing with mud, and without him, I would fail. For a moment, the sheer malice of it all threatened to overwhelm me. But then, a different feeling took over. A cold, sharp, and utterly furious determination. He was not going to take this from me. I took a deep, steadying breath and became the CEO of my own life. First, I meticulously documented every fake review, noting the creation dates of the profiles and the identical, stilted phrasing. I composed a calm, professional, and evidence-rich report to Etsy's Trust and Safety Department, formally requesting an investigation into fraudulent review manipulation. Next, I picked up the phone and called David. I didn't whine or complain. I didn't mention the divorce or the ugly personal drama. I was all business. Hi David, I said, my voice strong and clear. Clara from Clay and Hearth. I just got your email. I'll be direct. My business is not, nor has it ever been, in financial distress. It seems someone with a personal grudge is attempting to sabotage my professional relationships with malicious lies. I could hear his hesitation. Clara, You don't have to take my word for it, I interrupted smoothly. I am emailing you my accountant-verified profit and loss statements for the last 2 quarters as we speak. You'll see that our sales are up 40% year over year. Furthermore, to demonstrate my confidence and goodwill, I'd like to prepay for my next 2 pallet orders in full, via wire transfer, this afternoon. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Prepayment on that scale was unheard of. It wasn't just a sign of solvency, it was a sign of strength. A power move. Well, Clara, David said finally, his warm, friendly tone returning. That is quite a statement. The financials won't be necessary. I am so sorry you're having to deal with this. Consider the matter dropped. Your next shipment will be on its way tomorrow, on our usual terms. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had held the line. He had tried to burn down the business I had built, and I had put out the fire with cold, hard facts and the one thing he no longer had, capital. He thought he was exposing me as a failure. He had only succeeded in proving just how successful I had become without him. The attacks on my business ceased as abruptly as they had begun. Within 48 hours, Etsy's investigation concluded, and all 12 fraudulent reviews vanished from my page, along with a formal apology for the coordinated violation. My relationship with my supplier was stronger than ever. Mark's desperate, clumsy attempt at sabotage had not only failed, it had backfired. I knew his options had dwindled to nothing, and a man with nothing left to lose is a dangerous animal. The final confrontation was inevitable. It happened on a Thursday evening, rain lashing against the windows, the wind howling a mournful tune. I had just put Leo to bed and was curled up on the sofa with a book when a frantic, percussive banging erupted from the front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a desperate, angry assault, the sound of fists against solid oak. My heart leaped into my throat. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Mark. He looked like a wraith. His hair was plastered to his forehead by the rain, his expensive suit was rumpled and stained, and his eyes, visible even through the distorted glass, were wild with a terrifying cocktail of fury and despair. This wasn't the arrogant man from the texts. This was a man who had hit rock bottom and was still digging. I took a deep, steadying breath, slid the deadbolt open, and opened the door just enough for the brass chain lock to catch. "Clara, thank God," he gasped, his voice hoarse. He immediately tried to push the door open, but the chain held firm, groaning under the pressure. "Let me in. For God's sake, Clara, we need to talk." "There is nothing left for us to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of his chaos. "Don't do this," he hissed, his face contorted. "You can't just throw me out and lock me out of my own life. I have rights. This is my home, too. I lived here for 14 years. I'm entitled to half of everything." A cold, bitter smile touched my lips. The sheer, breathtaking ignorance of it. "You are entitled to nothing," I stated, each word a carefully placed stone. "And this is not your home. It never was. I suggest you consult the county property records. This house was purchased with funds from my grandmother's inheritance, 2 full years before you, and I even signed a marriage license. Your name is not, nor has it ever been, on the deed. You are a guest here, Mark. And your stay is over." The blood drained from his face. He looked utterly poleaxed, as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. In all his years of puffing out his chest about his house, he had never once bothered with the tedious little detail of whose name was on the legal title. He just assumed his presence gave him ownership. That can't be right," he stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's a marital asset. The law says. The law says that a premarital asset, purchased with separate and inherited funds, remains a separate asset," I recited, the words Catherine had drilled into me now flowing with chilling ease. "Especially when the other party, that would be you, has contributed nothing to its mortgage or upkeep. And most especially when that party has abandoned the marital home in favor of an adulterous relationship. You have no claim, Mark. None." His shock curdled into a venomous rage. "You planned this. All those years, you were planning this. You vindictive, cold-hearted." "No," I cut him off, my voice sharp as a shard of broken glass. "I didn't plan for you to betray me with my own sister. I didn't plan for you to get her pregnant and then announce it with a celebratory ha-ha while you stole from our bank account. I simply prepared for the inevitable day that your true character would fully emerge. You are the one who lit the match, Mark. You have no right to be angry with me for refusing to stand in the fire with you." The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. The anger evaporated, leaving behind a raw, pathetic desperation. His whole body sagged against the doorframe. "Please, Clara," he whispered, the rain dripping from his hair onto my porch. "I'm sorry. Okay? I know I messed up. I messed everything up. Jessica, it's not working. Her apartment is a shoebox, she cries all the time, she's terrified. I have no money. The credit cards are maxed out. I'm going to be homeless. I have nowhere to go. Just let me come home. Please. Just for a little while, until I can figure things out. For Leo's sake." There it was. The final card, the pathetic ace up his sleeve. He was trying to use our son not as a weapon this time, but as a shield for his own cowardice. I looked at the man on my doorstep, this drenched, hollowed-out shell of the person I had once promised to love forever. And I felt nothing. Not a flicker of anger, not a pang of sadness. Just a profound, empty pity. My lawyer has already filed the final divorce papers, I said, my voice flat and final. Any and all future communication will go through her. You are trespassing on my property, Mark. You need to leave. Now. I'll fight you, he suddenly snarled, a last, desperate burst of false bravado. I'll get a lawyer. I'll take you for everything you have. And that's when I allowed myself a small, cold, sad smile. Go ahead, Mark, I said softly, the words barely audible above the wind. Hire a lawyer. Oh, wait. I let the pause stretch out, heavy and sharp in the stormy air between us. You can't afford one, can you? His face crumpled. It was the precise moment he finally, truly understood. Checkmate. He had played a game he didn't even know the rules to, against an opponent who had been studying the board for months. And he had lost. I didn't say another word. I simply closed the door, slid the heavy deadbolt home with a decisive click, and walked away, leaving him alone in the rain and the darkness. The days following the confrontation at my door were filled with a profound and liberating silence. The storm had broken, and the quiet that remained was not empty, but peaceful. The final chapters of Mark's self-destruction were not delivered in person, but through the cold, impartial medium of legal emails and third-hand information. About a week later, an email from Catherine landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple, update on Daniels versus Daniels. Clara, just a courtesy update. We were copied on a notice from the Allegheny County Court this morning. It appears a formal eviction proceeding has been initiated against Jessica Miller by her landlord. The filing cites 2 months of non-payment of rent. It seems Mr. Daniels was not exaggerating his financial distress. They are required to vacate the premises within 30 days. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the screen. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like watching the final act of a play where I already knew the tragic ending. It wasn't satisfaction, not really. It was just the inevitable, logical conclusion. Cause and effect. He had built his entire life on my financial and emotional foundation. When I calmly and methodically removed that foundation, his whole world had no choice but to collapse into rubble. That evening, as I was helping Leo with his history homework, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, a blocked ID. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach, but some instinct told me to answer it, to hear the end of the story. I was right. Clara? It was Mark's voice, but it was a voice I barely recognized. The arrogance, the anger, the bluster, it was all gone. All that remained was a thin, reedy desperation, the sound of a man who had nothing left. What do you want, Mark? I asked, my voice even, giving away nothing. We're getting kicked out, he said, the words tumbling out, barely a whisper. The landlord put a notice on the door. We have nowhere to go. I don't know what to do. I remained silent, letting his words hang in the air. This was his mess. His problem to solve. He took my silence as an invitation to continue, the words spilling out of him now in a pathetic, self-pitying torrent. This is all her fault, you know. Jessica's. She was the one who was always pushing for more, for a bigger life. She's so immature, Clara. She doesn't understand how the real world works. She just thought I was some kind of ATM, that I could just wave a magic wand and fix everything. If she hadn't gotten pregnant, if she hadn't been so needy, none of this would have happened. A cold fury rose in me. I cut him off, my voice low and dangerous. Stop. He faltered. What? Do not blame her, I said, each word a chip of ice. Do not blame that innocent baby you created. You made a choice. You made 100 choices, every single day for months. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose to steal. This is the life you chose, Mark. Now, you need to live with it. But I don't want it, he cried, and the sound was so purely childish, so utterly devoid of responsibility, that it was shocking. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I made a mistake, Clara. I know that now. Please. Just help me. I have nothing. I thought of the haha text. I thought of his hands on my sister's pregnant belly. I thought of him trying to poison my son's mind. I thought of the 14 years of my life I had given him, the unwavering support, the steadfast love. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he deserved nothing from me. Goodbye, Mark, I said, and for the final time, I hung up the phone on the man who had been my husband. He tried to call back, once, twice. I declined the calls. A voicemail notification popped up. I stared at it for a long, silent moment. I saw not just a voicemail, but a doorway back into his chaos, his drama, his bottomless pit of need. I pressed my thumb down on the notification and swiped left. The screen flashed, voicemail deleted. An hour later, a single text message appeared. It was from Jessica. He's gone. He packed a duffel bag while I was in the shower and just walked out. He said he needed space, that he couldn't handle the pressure. He left me, Clara. He's gone. I read the message, then set my phone face down on the counter. The final domino had fallen. He had abandoned his wife. He had abandoned his pregnant mistress. In the end, he had abandoned everyone, including himself. He wasn't a monster. He was just a coward. And for the first time in 14 years, he was no longer my problem. 6 months passed. The silence that Mark's departure left behind was not an emptiness, but a canvas. At first, it was unsettling. The house felt too big, the quiet too loud. I would catch myself listening for the sound of his car in the driveway, or the rumble of the TV in the other room. But slowly, gradually, I began to paint over that canvas with new colors, new sounds, new routines. The silence transformed into the sound of peace, the sound of Leo's laughter, the sound of my own thoughts, clear and uninterrupted for the first time in years. It became the sound of freedom. The divorce was finalized with the quiet stroke of a judge's pen. Mark, with no money for a lawyer and no legal ground to stand on, signed the papers without a fight. He became a ghost, a whisper in the past. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he was drifting, bouncing between the spare rooms of old college friends, his welcome wearing thinner with each passing week. He was working a low-wage retail job, the kind he used to mock, a shadow of the corporate executive he once pretended to be. My life, in stark contrast, began to flourish. It turned out that the little hobby Mark had so condescendingly dismissed was, in fact, a thriving enterprise. Freed from the weight of his constant, subtle belittling, my creativity soared. The story of the sabotage attempt, which I shared discreetly with a few other female entrepreneurs, brought a surprising wave of support. My shop was featured on a popular home design blog, then in a national magazine. Orders flooded in, from all over the country, then from overseas. I had to hire 2 part-time employees just to handle the shipping, and then a studio assistant. Clay and Hearth was no longer a side project, it was a registered LLC, a brand. I was spending my afternoons not worrying about a cheating husband, but scouting locations in downtown Philadelphia to open my first flagship retail store. Leo and I discovered our new rhythm, a life built for 2. We had Friday movie nights, buried under a mountain of blankets with a giant bowl of popcorn. We spent our weekends hiking the trails at Valley Forge, the crisp autumn air filling our lungs. I was more present with him than I had been in years, my mind no longer occupied by the low-grade hum of a dying marriage. He was thriving. He was laughing again, that full-body, uninhibited laugh of a happy kid. And I realized that I hadn't just saved myself from a toxic marriage, I had saved him from growing up in a home filled with unspoken resentments and carefully constructed lies. I had given him back his peaceful childhood. One crisp November evening, I was sitting in my living room, the one he had tried and failed to claim. A fire crackled in the hearth. A glass of expensive Cabernet, from a bottle he had been saving for a special occasion, sat on the table beside me. This felt special enough. The house was quiet except for the soft scratch of Leo's pencil as he did his homework at the dining room table. I was looking over architectural floor plans for the new store, a sense of profound, bone-deep contentment washing over me. I had built this. All of it. Not just the business, but this peace, this safety. Then, a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, across the street, drew my attention. I glanced up, peering through the large picture window into the encroaching twilight. A man was standing under the halo of a streetlight, his shoulders hunched against a wind I couldn't feel. He was staring at my house. His clothes were thin and ill-fitting, his posture one of utter defeat. It took me a long moment to recognize him through the rain-streaked glass. It was Mark. He looked like a stranger. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a worn-out jacket. The confident swagger had been replaced by a weary slump. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, just looking at the warm, golden light spilling from the windows of the home he had so carelessly thrown away. He was looking at a life that was no longer his, a life that was thriving not just without him, but because he was gone. I didn't feel a surge of anger. I didn't feel a pang of pity. I felt nothing. He was a ghost from a past life, a character from a story that was already over. He had no power here anymore. Finally, as if the weight of his own failure was too much to bear, he seemed to shrink into himself. He pulled the collar of his thin jacket up around his neck, turned, and shuffled away into the darkness, disappearing down the quiet suburban street. I turned away from the window and looked back at the floor plans spread out on my coffee table. I took a slow sip of my wine, the rich, dark fruitiness a small, perfect celebration. I picked up my pen and made a note about needing more natural light for the gallery wall. He was stuck in the ruins of his past, forever looking back at what he had lost. But me? I was building my future, one beautiful, imperfect, handmade piece at a time. And I never looked back again. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. It means the world to me to be able to share it. My question for you is, have you ever had a moment in your life that felt like an ending, but turned out to be a powerful new beginning? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you again.